Hello and welcome to the AA Ireland podcast. I'm Paddy Common.
And I'm Anna Cullen.
In this episode, we talk to a legend from the Irish motor business, Aidan Doyle, on the eve of his retirement. And we learn all about his career from Opel to Kia via the FAI. Aidan is a great storyteller, so sit back and enjoy this one.
AA patrols are trained mechanics and fix 8 out of 10 cars at the roadside, meaning you can continue your journey and can control your breakdown costs. AA personal cover means you're covered in any car, even when you're not the driver, meaning you have the flexibility of switching drivers at ease. You can download the AA app. It's the fastest way to report a breakdown. It pinpoints your exact location and you can track your AA patrol's progress while you wait. To find out more, go to the aa.ie.
So we're joined this week by what I like to call PR guru, Aidan Doyle. Aidan is a legend in the PR motoring world, and Aidan is bowing out this year. He's retiring, Aidan. So thanks for joining us on the show. Delighted to have you, Aidan.
You're very welcome. Delighted to be here.
So look, obviously later on this year you are stepping away from your long career in Kia, and I would obviously talk about the other companies that you worked for before. I was on Dara O'Tuma's podcast there last night, and he'd heard that you were coming on. He was delighted to hear some of the stories. So look, take us back. Talk us through how you got into this crazy mad PR world, and where the beginnings were.
It's mad. It's purely by accident. I did an arts degree, and even to this day, people who do arts degrees having a notion what they're going to do with themselves, and it was no different 42 years ago when I exited UCD with a degree in history and politics. And a year later with a higher diploma in education, which qualified me as a secondary teacher, but which I basically did a training year in Cloisterware, and I chained my bicycle in the June the following year and said, that's me in teaching, I won't be back there. But as they say in Cloisterware, it's Sin Scéile. So I basically did what arts graduates did, a bit of this, a bit of that. Worked as a merchandiser in Coca-Cola, and did the civil service exams, AO, third secretary, the usual. And at the time I applied, and then I ended up, sorry Paddy, I ended up in the precursor of the National College of Ireland, which was the National College of Industrial Relations. It was based on the grounds of Gonzaga College in Ranelagh, run by the Jesuits, and it was basically a place where the trade unions sent their representatives to be trained in industrial relations, and the personnel industry, which is personnel management, was the artists, now known as HR. And I did a course there, and I ended up in Semper Tire Factory for about 12 weeks learning that trade. And that's how I got into the motor industry. I applied for a small ad in the Irish Times. Okay. A guy called Ken McDade was looking for an assistant he was the PR and personnel manager in General Motors, which was based in Pembroke Street at the time, subsequently moved out to Tala. And
what year is this?
That was 1982, July 1982. Okay. So that's when I landed purely by accident as the personnel PR assistant in General Motors. It was which was the precursor to Opel Ireland.
And Ireland at the time wasn't in great shape.
No, it was interest rates where it was hard to get a job. But still, even with 15 or 16% interest, Paddy, I got married 4 years later and had a house.
Wow.
On a fairly modest salary of $7,500 a year. So that's different times. And coincidentally, in the week I was actually driving a van for bachelors on Banner Road in Cabra at the time I applied for the job. And the same week I got an offer to work in General Motors. I also got an offer. My number came up in the the civil service lottery, and I was offered a job as an administrative officer. So,
but you didn't take
it's like
that,
the 46A bus, you know.
Okay, they came
job.
at once.
They came in twos. No,
you didn't take that.
You know, and then I started saying, 40 years later now, a nice pension, wouldn't I, in a lump sum.
I wouldn't have
had the crack though.
No.
I wouldn't have the crack. So basically then, the man who hired me went off to Germany on an assignment 3 years later, and then I became the personnel PR manager. And when he came back from his assignment in Germany in 1990, Arnold O'Byrne was in situ at the time, and he basically gave me the marketing gig. So I worked at that marketing job from 1990 to 2001. Left the industry for a while, ended up working in the FAI when our friend John Delaney was in situ, and I can confirm that the FAI was as dysfunctional internally, from an internal point of view, as it was to external providers. I refer to those 3 years in the FAI as my Terry Waite years. And I had a really good friend, John McCarthy. Well, he wasn't. It was Andy Needham was his name. Yeah. So we spent our 3 years nailed or
chained to a radiator.
Chained to a radiator.
Handcuffed to a radiator.
Handcuffed to a radiator in a Muse building at the back of the FAI in Merrion Square.
Well, let's take you back to Opel, because we had the current CEO, Managing Director of Opel Ireland, James Brooks, on recently, and he spoke fondly of you, and he spoke fondly of his first stint at Opel Ireland, and he was told in this first week at Opel that you need to be pals with this guy in Aidan Doyle in the marketing department. He says, why? Because he has the tickets. He's the fellow with the tickets.
Control of the tickets, exactly.
Look, obviously everyone knows about Opel's. You know, Opel was considered almost an Irish brand at the time because of that sponsorship. Talk to us how that sponsorship of that team came about.
It's an interesting one, and I know Arnold O'Byrne has written, he wrote his own book, and I think Arnold, who I'm still very friendly with, I think should have concentrated more on the marketing side of that deal, because it was extraordinary. But again, like everything else, a lot of that happened by accident. And basically the FAI was in a bad way. They hired this guy, a Kilkenny guy called Donny Butler, lovely fella. And Donny's job then, it was their first ever commercial manager, was to bring in revenue. And bear in mind that the background to the FAI traditionally was a very working class sport. The late great Billy Morton, who ran Athletics Ireland, at one stage was asked would he offer Morton Stadium for use for the FAI, for matches when Dalymount Park wasn't available, and he sort of said, no, there's too many bicycles chained to the railings in Merrion Square for the athletics to get involved with, because he considered athletics sort of middle class, and
got it.
And the FAI was very blue collar. Anyway, Donny was tasked with raising money, and the idea he came up with was to raffle 144 cars. So he basically went out to manufacturers looking for 36 cars each, and there was going to be this big raffle where people, the family of soccer, which was a term that wasn't even invented then, would subscribe £20 a month or whatever. So one of the companies they came to was Opel, and Arnold O'Byrne wasn't long in position. He came into the company in 1985 from Vauxhall in Luton. And he, the one that suggested to them, he said, well, look, should you not be going out looking for you don't have a sponsor? And he was, he came from a soccer background. He was sort of very heavily involved in Luton Football Club at the time. And so he couldn't believe that the FAI, why are you selling cars? Why aren't you selling sponsorship? So the deal he did with them is, look, we will sponsor you. Opel will sponsor you, and then
do you have any ideas of the sums involved? Do you remember?
It was £100,000, £100,000,
which was a lot.
It was a lot.
Then,
it was a big gamble. It was a lot for them.
What year are we talking? 84, 85?
This is 85, and I think the first match was in 86. And it was very cleverly constructed then, because what happened then, Arnold did the deal. Then one of the smartest moves he made was that Opel then went out and appointed a dedicated agency to handle it. Okay. And they went out for pitches. Now, one of the agencies that pitched for was an existing agency for us, and they came up with this tagline, Opel, Ireland's number one supporter, that basically ended up on the back of thousands and thousands and thousands of cars. Because bear in mind at the time that Opel was a sort of a top three brands. The big three brands in the country were Ford, Nissan and Opel at the time. And Fiat then subsequently, because of the success of finance and the Fiat Fund. So they appointed an agency at the suggestion of Ray Tracy, who knew these two guys, who were John Givens, who's Don Givens' brother, and a guy called Trevor O'Rourke. And they basically took on the thing. And what they did then is they went to Denmark, to the Danish FA. And the Danish FA, now this is all very historical, but very important in a marketing sense, they just basically went to the Danish FA, who had a sponsorship deal with Lurepack.
Okay, butter, yeah. Yeah,
the butter, the National Dairy Board, it's like our Kerrygold. Yeah. That's their brand in Denmark. Got the contract.
Xerox.
Exactly, Xerox, and brought it back. And then the big thing they did, which was a change, no international team at the time, they had sponsorship brand and replica shirts, but we made sure, or no, they didn't have sponsorship and replica shirts. No. So basically, Opel was the first international team that when people went to buy a replica shirt, it had this big Opel brand.
I remember that, because you couldn't buy a shirt without Opel on it.
Exactly. If you were a German supporter, you know, the team was sponsored by Mercedes. Yeah. And you might get a little Mercedes brand at the back of a tracksuit or something. But if you went to buy an Ireland shirt, it was just Opel.
Yeah, because you had to go to the UK to buy one without it, I remember.
And of course, now, so Arnold did the deal, and then the rest was luck. And then you're into Gary Mackay in Bulgaria, and Euro 88, and Jack Charlton, and 90 and 94. And all of a sudden, this sponsorship became the sort of biggest sponsorship deal ever done, sports sponsorship ever done in Ireland. And it served as a sort of template then for all that came afterwards, you know what I mean, with when Guinness got involved and the GAA, and Bank of Ireland got involved in the GAA, and Vodafone got involved in rugby. You know, but that was the, you know, and the problem is that students of marketing now only go back 20 years. But if you're sort of an age, and Arnold, who wasn't a marketing professional, was actually made a fellow of the Marketing Institute of Ireland just for that. It was a stroke because, you know, basically somebody came in to buy cars off him and he pivoted.
Was that a gamble at the time? I mean, obviously it was £100,000 at the time in 1985 was probably a considerable amount of money. If the Charlton era hadn't happened, would that have been possibly a mistake?
Oh yeah, it mightn't have. Well, you see, it was modest money. No, it would. I mean, there was no performance-based element to it. You know what I mean? Win, lose, draw, qualify or not qualify.
The money was the money. Yeah.
The money was going out every quarter.
But who could have envisaged so many people wandering around with Opel on the front of their...
Nobody could. And you see, and we capitalised on that, you know what I mean? Because everywhere, you know, there was... I remember for one of those championships, you know, the actual team poster, which was literally printed, like 500,000 of those were going out, you know.
Because every team photo they were wearing.
Every team photo, every squad photograph, every training session, you know.
So where did you come into in the midst of all of that?
I was on the PR side at the very start, and then I moved into the marketing side. So it was somebody else, a couple of colleagues, John Young and Ian Donald, did the groundwork on the sponsorship, and I basically took over the sponsorship in post Italia 90. Mm-hmm. But I was still involved in the PR side because we were bringing journalists away on trips, and we were some of the stuff you were doing. You know, it was so big, you know, that you could book a room with a few and give journalists a few pints just in Dublin, you know, and stuff it with people with Opel shirts, and the picture desks would use that the following day, you know what I mean? It'd be like fans celebrate. And the fans would be some of their own, you know, lads that weren't away. And of course, the famous thing about that soccer sponsorship was when it took off. Conor Hoolan, the very famous sports journalist, was asked, I remember, about Italia 90. Did he enjoy Italia 90? And he said, and in his infamous way, I missed it. I was away. Because the crack, that whole Italian 90 phenomenon, you know, even though you had the travelling fans, the phenomenon was here.
It was better here.
Well, it was just here because it was here that you got the full magnitude of it, that on match days, there was no cars on the road. There was no fucking traffic.
Yeah.
And
I remember it. I do remember
nobody,
it, yeah.
just the road. And the Irish Times published I don't know which match it was, but the Irish Times published a photograph, a very famous photograph, I don't know which match it was, of some fella reading the Irish Times, a man on his own reading the Irish Times in Ryan's Park 8th Street. And the reason he was on his own reading the Irish Times during the match was Ryan's Park 8th Street didn't have a
television.
Didn't have a television.
Okay.
So here was a man that was just totally immune to everything. He just took the opportunity to go for a quiet pint. So in terms of, it was a marketing phenomenon, but in marketing terms, all around that was built this narrative, you know, Opel, Ireland's number one supporter. And what was basically the premise is that for, what we were saying, either explicitly or implicitly in our communications activity, was there's no such thing as an Irish car anymore. But Opel is the next best thing. But that was not unique then, nor is it unique since, because Toyota had, you know, Dennis Mahoney, they had sort of built up a sort of an Irish image, you know what I mean? And Dennis Mahoney at the time was sort of involved in Irish sponsorships, and even at one stage he brought out a glossary of golfing terms, Trí Gaeilge.
Okay.
Ford Ireland were very, very aggressive in pursuing the
Irish angle,
the Irish heritage, because they had a factory up to the sort of 90s in Cork. And then and sometimes with marketing, it's just a case of recycling. And you go all the way to this day, and a brand that you're not unfamiliar with, Skoda,
made for Ireland,
are doing exactly the same thing. You know, and what you do is you base your narrative. These are cars; they're not built for Ireland. We know that. You know what I mean?
Not built in Ireland, yeah.
Or in Ireland, because our market's too small for anybody to build cars. You know what I mean? We're sort of 1% of the total European market, so nobody is building cars specifically for Ireland. But if you come up with a very clever narrative, you know, which Skoda have done, and you just wrap the green flag around your communication, and you get this nice cozy feeling. And that's what Ford used to do, Toyota did, Opel did very, very successfully, you know, for 10 years. You know, so much so that they actually hit number one for the first time ever in I think it was in 1996. But it's a nice narrative, and it works in marketing terms.
So obviously there was a crossover at some stage from you working in Opel at that stage to crossing over to the FAI. Was there were the two linked? It
was. Look, I left the Opel for personal reasons, because Opel went this familiar path of becoming. It was a fully independent. You know, for people that aren't familiar with it, the motor industry is divided into distributors, independent distributors, and what we call NSCs, national sales companies. So Opel was a national sales company reporting directly into a head office in Zurich, and then what it was downgraded and basically no longer reported into the head office, reported into a new zone office in Stockholm. And basically, you know, when you're sort of young and foolish, you know, and when I say that in early 40s, I didn't like this new dispensation, and I sort of threw me toys out of the pram a bit, you know what I mean?
Okay.
and
Not for me.
not for me, and walked away. And then, of course, there was no plan B. So the plan B ended up with doing a master's in DCU in marketing. So I had all this experience in marketing, but I didn't have the I didn't have the actual practical, the theory. I had the practical experience, but didn't the theory. And then I was back almost. My life thereafter mirrored my life post UCD. And one of the guys I mentioned earlier, on Trevor O'Rourke, just got me into the FAI. And so it was a good move for me in terms that I had the experience of it.
What year are we talking?
We're talking about 2003. And without being big-headed, it was a good move for the FAI. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't a particularly good move for me, you know what I mean? And it did turn out, I didn't know, and I'm not going to say, it was slightly dysfunctional organisation. You know, and we were putting kids through college.
Yeah, exactly. It worked for that.
And so I basically bailed out of it 3 years later. Now, it was an interesting experience because at the time, the FAI had taken over the league and promised a sort of a land of milk and honey, and which didn't happen. And then, of course, a few years later, as we know well, 10 years later, then the FAI is imploding, and Paul Rowan and Mark Toy got a great book out of it, which I thoroughly enjoyed, you know, because there is great pleasure in reading a book and you're saying, yeah, I could have fucking told you that. Sorry, I could have told you that 10 years ago. So I just ended up back in, and there's a great symmetry. I arrived in town early today, Paddy, and I bailed for a cup of tea into Brooks Hotel just down the road. And that's where I did an interview for Kia 14 years ago with James Brooks and his Korean president at the time. And James will tell the story. I haven't listened to I know he's done a podcast with you recently where friends of his thought he was getting a job in IKEA.
That's exactly the line he said. He said to me, what do you know what, I'm not sure you know much about cars, you know a bit, but what the hell do you know about furniture?
Furniture, yes. And it was the same. I remember going to a headhunt agency, because again it was advertised and anonymously. And the guy then revealed the brand, and my heart just sank. You know,
well, we have to put this in context for people, because people are listening to, you know, Kia EV6, World Car of the Year, European Car.
Well, it's not the World. The Ioniq is World Car of the Year.
Yeah.
Irish Car of the Year and European Car of the Year.
European Car of the Year, exactly. But it's the Kia brand is now a very different brand to what it was 14 years ago.
It is, and it was. Yeah, there's a good, and the person should be named, because a year prior to applying for the job and getting it with James, I'd interviewed with another person for a job in Kia, and this man sort of summoned up the marketing strategy. He says, "What do you think of this for an idea?" And what was it? He said to me, he did an even broader Dublin accent than I have, Paddy. Now, just think of it. A Picanto for €1. And I said, that's grand, yeah. Go away and have a think about that and come back to me. So I rang him the next day and I said, you know what?
You're grand.
You're grand. I think I'll stay where I am. And I was in the FAI at the stage, so that's, you know, it was like the old the girl on the dance floor, you know, I'm lonely, but I'm not desperate. I'm not desperate.
So we're talking 1998 here now, are we?
No, we're talking 1996.
96, sorry. Okay, my maths is poor.
Yeah.
So you make the transfer eventually.
I make the transfer back to the motor industry. I'm very, very comfortable with that. I had made in those years in Opel, you know, I'd worked very well with the dealers, and I'd also worked very well on the PR side with journalists. And as you know well, Paddy, because you were one of the newer breed that came into that industry, the older breed, they were just journalists. So it was very heavy duty socialising.
Bring us back to that time, and in particular, I suppose, to the motoring journalist core now, without libeling anyone or mentioning too many names, but you can if you want. Set the scene for us at the early stages of Kia and the motoring world. How that's not an easy job to integrate a new brand into a skeptical audience. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, in fairness, from if you go from just the macro sense, journalists, regardless of the publication or the circulation or anything, in marketing terms and PR terms, they are in that sort of communications framework, where you have customers and dealers and everything. But the press would be in that sort of cohort of what we call opinion leaders. Yeah. So in terms of Kia's strategy, both on a European basis and on an Irish basis, and when James and I, in terms of the people you're communicating with, be it dealers or be it journalists, one of the things, if you aspire to being a big brand, then you have to start acting like you're a big brand, and the term, now I'm sure I'm sure I'm not the first one to coin it, but I don't remember reading it. And I remember I was chatting to James at the time, and we said, we got to get into BBB, big brand behaviour.
Okay.
So I remember our first dealer conference that I did. We went through the kitchen sink at it, you know what I mean? There was
lights,
camera, action, and there was, and we're talking, this is an audience of maybe 40 people. And we're spending about sort of 15 grand on audio visual, things that I didn't even understand. And the AV company is saying, we can do PIP for you. And I said, what's PIP? And he said, picture in picture,
Okay, yeah.
And it was this sort of technology.
Fancy back then.
It was fancy back
cutting
then.
Edge.
And this was all sort of done in analog technology. This is pre-digital and cost a fortune. And likewise, we decided to adopt the same attitude with journalists, and we're saying, you know what, if we're offered a place on the side of a pan-European test drive, let's get as many places as we can, let's not just bring one or two, if we're going to have a launch at home, let's do it big, let's not register 4 cars and have people hanging around.
Let's register 15 or 10
yeah, let's register 15 or 20. And it's persuading that audience, that small audience of journalists, that this brand means business. Now the challenge at the time, and as you're well aware, is that this was a bit smoke and mirrors, because in the end of the day, motoring writers are product journalists. Mm-hmm. So you end up writing about product. So the product has to match the puff. And let's be honest with it didn't always do so. But Kia and Hyundai, both part of the same group, and bear in mind that Hyundai in Ireland, in that sort of distributor NSC divide, Hyundai is a distributor and Kia is an NSC.
What does that mean, though, in terms of, what's the...
A distributor, so say a distributor like Toyota or Hyundai, they basically just go to the factory and buy cars.
Okay.
They buy them
like wholesale.
Wholesale. And the factory doesn't really care what happens to them thereafter. And as you know, Paddy, if you work for a national sales company, you can say to the NSC can say to head office, give us 1,000 of them. And the NSC, because you're buying them with our money. What happens if you don't sell them?
Or you can have 1,000 of those, but you need to take 500 of these ones here.
And that did happen. So Hyundai and Kia, both part of this big conglomerate, the Hyundai, that word I can never pronounce in Korean, Chaibal or Chaibal. I don't know.
I have to believe you.
It's a conglomerate.
Yeah.
So they were lucky, that what was happening then was that SUVs were starting to come into fashion. And then all of a sudden,
Kia
had the Sportage and the Sorento. Hyundai had the Santa Fe and the Tucson. And
if you go back to both the Sorento and the Santa Fe, they were very, very basic.
But they ticked a lot of the other
They
boxes.
ticked a lot of boxes. They were just, it was a ladder chassis. Body popped on top of it. 3-piece suite in it. And all of a sudden, and 7 seats, all of a sudden, people who previously were in, say, the Renault Espace or the Opel Zafira, all of a sudden, people, both male and female, the new thing in a family car was an SUV. And this is before Nissan launched the Qashqai, which gave this whole thing
the new crossover,
a new crossover, this new phenomenon. So this is what the success of Kia was built on. These two models, these SUV models, became desirable, and then on top of that, back in 19, it was back around that time, 1996, 98, that Kia opened a factory in Slovakia, then started producing the Ceed, and all of a sudden, these cheap and cheerful models like Rio and Picanto started improving, and then the brand became mainstream, and right up to today, where probably the Hyundai Motor Group, they have to be, after Tesla, probably one of the biggest movers in EV technology. And they were ahead of the Europeans in that regard, ahead of Toyota. Now we know then that Volkswagen and the German brands were playing catch up, and when they did catch up, of course, they caught up with great effect. But
Kia and Hyundai didn't bother too much with hybrid. They've just really kind of gone gung ho for EV, and it seems to have paid off.
Yes, they've gone for EV and PHEV, and the Toyota, in fairness, the word is that Toyota are still, in the long term, are backing the hydrogen model. But now it'll be interesting to see. This in the next couple of months, this new car, whose name I can't remember, it's a funny name. They're launching a new SUV.
Yeah.
Well, they're launching a new SUV, and it'll be interesting to see. But there's another, you see, and this is the power of marketing. I mightn't necessarily agree with Toyota's marketing strategy, but if you do the research now, the two brands that score highest for electric recall are the two T's, Tesla and Toyota. Because if you say electric often enough, then people think that a HEV is an electric car, and a HEV is not an electric car. And a lot of people who traded in their RAV 1.9 diesel for a 2.5 petrol hybrid have discovered that to their cost, when they're making that extra visit a month to the fuel pumps. But again, if we go back, you say Irish often enough.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an Irish brand, and if you say electric, and it's this, and it's a triumph of marketing, start your electric journey with a Toyota hybrid.
Electric, yeah. The word electric and electrified are two different things.
Yes, no, but it's wonderful. But really, when I'm looking at the Simeway figures, I don't, when I'm putting on the filters, I don't include HEV in the electrified. It's PHEV, and if you want to get because bear in mind that Toyota has such a huge car park that and then they stopped selling diesel. So part of their strategy was, look, these HEVs are the only show in town. We're not saving the planet. We're saving us. We have to pivot all of these diesel customers into a HEV because they're the only things we have to sell. And if we make them think they're saving the planet in the course of that action, well and good. But it'll be interesting to see now when they start launching full EV markets. You know, then they're in with the big boys. They're in with Tesla. They're in with the Hyundai Motor Group and Kia and Hyundai, and they're in with they're in with Volkswagen.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, but having said that, the power of the Toyota brand in Ireland
It's vast.
is huge. The car park, and you see, and bear in mind that in marketing terms, when you're talking to people about familiarity, a huge amount of familiarity is not based on how much money you're spending on advertising. It's based on the amount of cars that you have on the road. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a cul-de-sac in Ireland or a Boreen that doesn't have, you know, 5 or 6 Toyotas in it.
When I think of automotive PR in Ireland, and I would concur, most of the journalists I know would say there's 2 names that come up. There's yourself, there's Emma Toner, who was ex-Peugeot Parish, now Opel. You know, what you might do in the coming months or years, I don't know, you might be standing at a lectern teaching this. What would your advice be? You know, what's your PR 101 from Aidan Doyle? How is it done right? Because most people would regard you do it very well.
Well, look, it's the second letter.
Relations. Yeah.
You know, and it's relations and it's relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's a mix, Paddy, of just old-fashioned relationships built, you know, sitting beside somebody on a plane, sitting with them late at night in a bar, meeting them, handing out the keys, ringing them. But it's a huge amount of it is. And the problem that people my age now have is that we come across as slightly dinosaurs because we're advising people, younger people, to talk.
Yeah.
But they don't talk. Communication is different now, you know what I mean?
It's rapid and it's
rapid and it's text
sterile
and everything, and it is and it isn't. You know, like my daughter now, just sort of, she shows me some of the texts she gets from her friends and that they have on their chats, you know, or the voice messages, you know, that they're sending each other, and they're fucking hilarious.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd be proud of the Bon Mots or the Bon Mots that these young people, and we have this sort of stereotype that these young people can't talk now. But I always feel that, you know, picking up a phone is a great way to do things. But go back to your, you know, the 101 is that don't treat the danger always is in practical public relations is that we set up a distribution list, you know, a BCC list. Mm-hmm. And that's the only time.
That's the only touch point.
That's your only touch point, is that you're sending out communications, and you know, and that's your only communication, you know. So what my feeling is that always, and it's a very, you know, particularly in Ireland, it's a small country, you know. So,
do you think some of the arts are being lost or will be lost? You know, the arts of, you know, be it public relations for Kia or, you know, washing machines or whatever. Do you think there is a danger that some of those softer arts are being lost?
I think so. You know what I mean? Because what can happen is that in the macro they'll be lost, because people will say, look, I don't need to have relationships with all these people. You know what I mean? And you'll just hire a PR agency. And the PR agency's job will just be to spin stuff to key media, you know what I mean? So we know every time we consume, it's always a curiosity of mine, you know, particularly when I'm listening to radio, and I'm sort of saying, there's 2 hours radio. How much of that was spun to me? Should the PR agency, if a PR agency has been responsible for half an hour of that content, I'm always saying they should be on the fucking credits but at the end, you know.
Conversely, how has journalism changed?
Journalism, it's funny now. I was having that conversation. You know, it's not curated in the same way that we were used to. Like my generation, you know what I mean, where we just bought our newspaper, and that was it. Somebody was getting paid big money in Abbey Street or Delir Street or whatever to present this news to me in what they thought was
The right fashion.
the right fashion and the right order. And to this day, even though, and I've had this discussion with Michael McAleer in the Irish Times, even to this day, you know, I don't buy the Irish Times anymore, but I like the e-paper format.
Okay.
Because I flick through it, and this is sort of the editor, somebody in there has decided this is the way the news is going to be presented, and I like to flick through it in that sort of traditional way. That, yeah. I'm consuming it in a different way, but in ways I'm consuming it in the same way. So without a doubt, long form journalism is just fading out, you know,
because
completely.
of shorter attention spans, the desire for news yesterday rather than the you know, allowing something to be curated, as you say.
Yeah, but now it's curators in, you know, now we've Google newsfeed curating news. TikTok is curating news. Facebook is curating news, and it's sort of being presented to us in an algorithm. But then even people my age are sort of saying, I'm using Spotify now. I'm not sort of taking LPs out of a sleeve and sort of dusting them off, you know, and putting them on, and then sort of, oh shit, I have to take it. I'm sort of, you know, what am I in the mood for now? You know, and I call up an artist. And, do I want just elbow, or do I want elbow radio,
or elbow live? Or
yeah, you know, and or do I want a podcast? You know, and I just call it up, and it's so we're all used to these modern things. But just go back to your journalism. The other thing as well, the big thing, of course, in our industry is the challenge now that the traditional print journalists have. And this is not just in motoring, but any product PR, is that I don't want to read about, if the consumer is saying, I don't really want to read car reviews anymore. I want to watch them.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, for instance, you know, you have a young DJ in FM 104.
Yeah.
And he's thousands and thousands of subscribers. He's 100,000 views on a review he did on the Kia EV6. I'm talking for people who don't know. Mark Noble, Nobby on cars, Nobby on cars. So all of a sudden...
But the modern motoring journalist is now a TV presenter, often a podcast host, a photographer, a videographer if they have to edit their own videos, as well as writing and doing the traditional media.
Yeah. And the one of the, particularly if you work for a multinational and you work in the PR industry, all of a sudden head offices are now looking for metrics. Yeah. You know, who are you bringing to see us on that trip?
Are they influencers?
Are they influencers? You know what I mean? Exactly. What's the metrics? You know, hope you're not bringing your friends so you can have a couple of late night drinks with them in the bar. I've never done that.
Right, you're coming towards the end of your current career, I'm going to say, because you do plan to retire later in the year. How do you feel about that?
Terrified.
Why?
Terrified. Just it's. Maybe I'm wrong. There's all sorts of views. Some people, you know, they talk about, you know, our work career, Paddy, is the second act, and then our retirement is the third act.
Yeah.
Now, in ways, retirement can be liberating. Some people just say, I'm free at last.
Yeah, if you hate your job.
Yeah, if you hate your job. Now, I sort of like my job, and I like the phone ringing, so I'm sort of afraid of that. And of course, from an existential point of view, retirement is always scary for people, because people start talking to you about retirement policies. And the one thing about retirement policies and financial advice and everything is that, if they came in a PDF and you did Control F with death
It's fucking everywhere, you know. It's,
it's
you know what I mean. We expect you to die at such an age, and if you die, and you know when you die, and
marked
it's
on this chart.
it's everywhere. It's everywhere. You get these documents that are just full of the D word, which is results in another D word, depressed. So no, I'm.
But do you think there's, and it's slightly off track, but do you think there's something that people associate themselves or identify too much with the role that they had as an employee?
Oh, without a doubt, we you know, it's a trap that loads of people fall into, and you know, and to a certain extent, it's more so. It's more so with my generation, Paddy, because younger people, and you be included in that, you know, that have sort of, there's more job mobility now. Mm-hmm. So people don't, you know, sign up
for life
anymore.
Yeah,
you
well,
know, that famous Donovan song, you know, here's your go watch and the shackles for your chain and a piece of paper to say you left here sane. And what's it? And if you have a son who wants a good career, just get him to sign on the dotted line and work for 40 years. So that's gone. So I think the younger generation, but our generation, yes, we do define ourselves. You know, you're Bob the Builder.
I'm this.
You're Bob the Builder, you know, Pat the Postman, Aidan the PR or marketing man, you know, and so you sort of say, and what am I now? And that's a big existential challenge, you know, and there's loads of, and to a certain extent, you know, when we retire, we need, you know, as I say, you know, you need a financial advisor in your life. Mm-hmm. But to some extent, you know, you need a Maureen Gaffney in the other corner, sort of telling you,
exactly.
It's going to be great, it's wonderful. And I think it will be wonderful. But yeah, it is scary, and I think anyone that tells you otherwise, except for the people, because for some people, there is, if you hate your job, there is a genuine sense of liberation, you know, so that for them, you know, the last year in their working career can't go fast enough.
Yeah.
And for the likes of me, probably it's gone just a little bit too fast.
Okay. But I would see you, lecturing. I would see you teaching.
Know. I have a bit of I don't know. Again, Michael McAleer again said something similar to me. And I said to him, look, I'd just be happy if somebody out there thinks I'm worth a little bit more than the minimum wage for.
No, you can't be using the word worth. I think I like the Public Relations Institute in Dublin now. I think they would be delighted to have.
Well, I'd love to. I do talk a bit, yeah. So it could be a possibility.
In terms of whoever comes in behind you, what would be your advice?
My advice would be creative. You know, it's not always possible if you're working for a big multinational, you know what I mean? But get as much creativity, be proud of what you do, and talk to people, you know, talk to the press, talk to the dealers, talk to your colleagues. And I just think in life generally, now we all want to be liked, you know what I mean? And
it's not always possible.
It's not always possible, but you can start by trying to make yourself likeable.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean? And that is, you know, you never, if you don't take that first step, you know, you're going to get more out of the people around you. You know, that sort of communications framework of all the people you have to deal with. And one of the big things, and probably, and I left it out of that earlier, one of the most important things, and it's something I had to learn in life, I have to say, because is we all in business have partners, suppliers, people we're buying product from, and they are so important in your day-to-day life. Build relationships with them people. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, you know, even from a practical point of view, you should be giving them 3 weeks' notice to do a job for you. And if you're not nice to those people, that's exactly what you will need to give them. But if you get on with people and you say, oh, Jesus, I should have fucking asked you for this 3 weeks ago, but it's happening tomorrow. And that's a lesson in life. I think just be nice. Be nice to everyone.
It's sound advice. Sound advice.
That's my advice.
My final question, Aidan, is a two-parter. One is professionally, what were your highlights? And professionally, how would you like to be remembered?
On the marketing side, like King Lear, you know what I mean, and to paraphrase by Charlie Haughey, I think in the two big brands, you know, I think I did do the state some service.
Yes.
Or did do the company some service. So I'm proud of the work I did with Opel as an established brand. I'm proud to have been part of that whole triumph that was the sponsorship, and have made some contribution to that. And I'm proud of some of the ads that we made with McCann Erickson at the time, and with Kia. I'm proud of the contribution I made, and I don't want to oversell it because there were so many people.
You can't undersell it either. It's been
it's
been a big one.
But the big it is, but to a certain extent, the right person, at the right time, because it's just such a wonderful company to be involved with, because of, you know, the big thinking in Korea that these. You know, and it's basically, you know, very much a family-dominated business, that this man, you know, Chairman Chung and his son, Yusun Chung, they decided, okay, we're going to bring this brand to another place. And they invested big money in terms of product. So it was nice to be part of that journey, you know, that went from IKEA to Kia, being... European Car of the Year. And I remember saying to, you know, and that European Car of the Year, I remember texting one of my colleagues in Europe and saying, you know, the thing about European Car of the Year, or any Car of the Year, and this is probably not something that's understood, is that to win awards like that, you have to come 5th and 6th and 3rd and 4th and 2nd, and eventually you will get it. And I'm from the PR point of view, I'm sort of associated in that whole Irish Car of the Year dynamic, and sometimes in a less than favourable way. But I think, going back to that advice to people, this is all about relationships, and all awards, be it the European Car of the Year award, the World Car of the Year award, or any award system, it's always a mix of, you know, the product and the communication. You know, that you've got all your ducks in a row, and you've given everybody, in the Irish Car of the Year, everybody's had an opportunity to drive the cars. And I'm sort of proud of doing my business properly and winning those awards, both with Opel. I think with Opel we won 3 Irish Car of the Years when I was in situ, and with Kia likewise. So I'm proud of that, but I'm more proud in the PR sense. I have great pride, you know, that somebody like you, Paddy, could make that introduction at the very start and put me with a really professional lady like Emma Toner. And there are people in our industry, you know, that just work really well. You know, Pierce in Frank Cullen and Don Hall, and there are, and people like you, Paddy, in your stint in Volkswagen, and Graham Lennox, who's in the VW group. These are all, you know, really good professionals, and I hope that that's what I've been remembered for. I don't want to be remembered as a particularly, in terms of me as a sociable person. I much prefer to be remembered as a good professional, being a marketing professional.
Oh, I think that's a given. I think that's a given. You know, for personally, you know, I enjoyed both in Volkswagen and my time as a journalist, that every phone call was seldom less than 50 minutes long. So we would cover an awful lot of ground. Those calls will continue, of course. No, but I think you've done an amazing service to the you know, people say Ireland doesn't have a motoring industry, but we do. We have a motor retail industry. You've done an amazing service to that industry, and you've made an awful lot of friends, and that will continue. And that sort of investment from your side doesn't go unnoticed. So, you know, from my point of view, you'll be remembered as someone who you came away with feeling better than you started.
Thank you.
That's how I would sum it up.
Yeah.
You always came away from an interaction with you feeling better, and that's a great place to be.
And I've made, Paddy, it's funny you should say that. I've made the same comment about you to people.
Oh, well, not everyone would say that, but there you go.
Well, I would say it.
Aidan Doyle, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed that chat with Aidan. He's had such a super career and he will be missed, but we'd certainly like to wish him all the best in the future.
I really enjoyed that as well. He is such a great storyteller and a fund of information as well. So if you would like to read or listen to more of our content, go to the AA blog, the aa.ie/blog. And you will, of course, find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook and TikTok. Please subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, goodbye and be safe.